Hello everyone. Today we will be presenting Chapter 11, Part 2, Development, Policy Making and the Roles of Market, State and Civil Society. 11.6 The Washington Consensus on the Role of the State in Development and its Subsequent Evolution. Consensus reflected the free market approach to development followed in those years by the IMF, World Bank, and key U.S. government agencies. It contained 10 points. The 10 points of Washington Consensus. There is no mention of shared growth of the central need to focus on eliminating absolute poverty to achieve development in any meaningful sense, or of reducing inequality as central ends in themselves, as well as instruments of economic growth. Moreover, the list is striking in its limited applicability to two of the most successful cases in the history of economic development, South Korea and Taiwan. These cases not only represent almost the highest rate of economic growth, but also have often been cited as examples of shared growth in which absolute poverty was eliminated earlier on, and the lower income groups have continued to benefit from the development process. For about half of its elements, the Washington Consensus is at best of limited applicability to South Korea and Taiwan. It can be concluded that the state had had a broader role in more successful development experiences than encapsulated by the Washington Consensus. The new consensus focused solely on growth rather than broader human development. An important dimension of the new consensus is the emphasis on government's responsibility to focus on poverty alleviation. The new consensus also appears to reflect a growing sentiment of the goal of poverty eradication is finally achievable, especially given recent progress in health, education, and other areas. The role of government in development borrows some important lessons from the Washington Consensus period. In particular, the stress on market-based development and limiting government's role in direct production continues to be the consensus view. Elements are not based on an assumption that government is a benevolent provider of social welfare. (11.7) Development, Political Economy, Theories of Policy Formulation and Reform. Here is a problem. Why did some countries reform better than others? The answer is, a foundation is to focus on quality of incentives provided by the underlying economic institutions. People may be assumed to oppose policy changes if they think they are likely to personally lose by them. Use these two to see the voting patterns on policy reform, because people care about themselves and voting for the reform that benefit them. So it is likely people reject the reform that only benefit the minority because majority will not benefit. And if the condition of gain is not clear, people don't know they will gain or lose from the reform. Risk-averse will oppose it because they don't want any harm to them. Politicians would like to win the campaign, so they have to do something real, something work in the short term. So they choose to value short-term benefit rather than a long-term, and this short-term benefit can harm the long-term benefit. Here is phenomenon called past dependency, which is a condition in which the past conditions of individual or economy affects future conditions. For example, if institutional metrics rewards piracy, There is no legal system to ban the piracy, and of course, piracy is more cheaper than other means for both producer and consumer. Then they will pursue piracy than innovation. Under the circumstance, only piratical organizations will come into existence. No incentive for people in power to change them. This allocation of inefficient property rights and inefficient institutions continues at the expense of efficient constitutions. Because if piracy exists, the innovation for inefficient constitution will be meaningless. As we know, there are two types of democratic systems, democracy and autocracy. For democracy, it is more likely to reflect well-being of majority because the decision is made by voting. According to what we said before, the voting will back up the reform benefit majority. Assuming election stimulus give incentive to pursue short-term accomplishment, as what we performed before. The politicians have to let economy perform good during the election time. This might at the expense of long-term development. For democracy, it has more stable social system, which hold a more stable economic system. Less volatilization is good for economic growth, but this benefit may be offset by partition effect. For autocracy, they have more chance to reach maximum rate of growth by centralizing the resource to develop one or several industries like China, focus on exporting and get success. But this growth may be result of still faster. The short-term high-speed growth winning by the over-issue of money may be at the expense of long inflation. .8 Development roles of NGOs and the broader citizen sector. Governmental organizations or NGOs is defined by the United Nations Development Programme as any non-profit voluntary citizens group which is organized on a local, national or international level who have common interests. They bring citizens concerned to governments, monitor policies, and encourage political participations. Cooperatives or co-ops have assisted farmers with getting more reliable and lower cost inputs, better access to credit, and higher prices and better marketing channels for their input. In other regions, co-ops have been subject to manipulation by the state, paving the way for corruption as well as inefficiency. Public goods are non-excludable and non-rival. Activities in which NGOs have comparative advantages typically lies between conventional private and public goods in these dimensions. In particular, they tend to partially rival, partially excludable, rivalry but not excludable, or excludable but non-rival. Figure 11.2 reflects the range of activities in these two dimensions. The result is a typology that includes private goods, high excludability, high rivalry in the upper right-hand corner, referred to here as Type 1 goods, and public goods, low excludability, low rivalry in the lower left-hand corner, referred to here as Type 3 goods. The production and the distribution of these Type 1 and Type 3 goods are generally assigned to the market and the public sector. In the lower right-hand corner are found common pool or common property resource characterized by low excludability but high rivalry. Examples are natural resources such as fisheries and forests with open access. These resources often tend to be overused. Increasingly, NGOs are helping community-based organizations or CBOs reclaim this role in common property resource allocation because they are organizations based on trust rather than coercions or individual self-interest. NGO may be able to arrive at efficient, socially acceptable allocation of common property resources at relatively low transaction costs. Type 5 goods are in the upper left-hand corner, are the productive ideas. which are non-rival and excludable. And type 4 groups exhibit high excludability but low library. Seven partially overlapping and mutually reinforcing types of organizational comparative advantage for international or national NGOs or local organizations. 1. Innovation. NGOs can play key roles in design and implementation of programs focused on poverty reduction and other development goals. For example, NGOs that work directly with the poor may design new and more effective programs that reach the poor, facilitated by the close working relationship. Individual profit-making firms may lack incentive for poor innovation, and governments have been relatively less successful at significant programs innovation compared to the NGOs. Second, program flexibility. NGOs can address development issues that are viewed as important to the communities in which it works. NGOs is not constrained by the limits of public policy or other agendas like foreign assistance priority, or they are unconstrained by the preference of the international NGOs. NGOs may have greater flexibility in altering their program structure according than would be the case of government program. NGOs may be better to make use of participation mechanisms. Third, specialized technical knowledge. NGOs may be greater repositories of technical expertise and specialized knowledge than local government. Specialized knowledge is acquired in the process of doing specialized work with the local citizen groups. These programs reflect innovations covered with local NGOs and advantages in technical knowledge. Fourth, target local public goods and services that are rival but not excludable, such as local public health facilities. Property resource management, design, and implementation. NGOs, including federations of local CBOs, can play important role in common property management and targeted local public goods provision. Both government and private sectors have poor track record in ensuring sustainability of forests, lakes, coastal fishing, and other common property resources, known as the commons. The large fraction of world's people still rely on these local natural resources for most of their income and consumption. The NGO's programs include training assistance with organizational development. Common property resources are rival but non-excludable. 6. Trust and credibility. NGOs may have other advantages over government in gaining the trust and providing effective services to the groups with special needs, notably those in extreme poverty. NGOs' local presence and relationship, frequent interactions and communications, and greater avenue for participation may generate greater trust among the poor and other citizens. Seven, representation and advocacy. NGOs may hold advantages in understanding the needs of the poor, who otherwise as others excluded from political processes and even local community deliberation. NGOs may play a role of aggregation of preference and hence representation of community needs. NGOs have better understanding of locally binding poverty traps and the minority. Exceptional failures of either government or private sectors can create situations under which NGOs can and or perhaps to temporarily step in to fill the void through sector extension. For example, BRDC is involved with producing private goods such as shoes and seats under conditions of dysfunctional private sector, or at least in rural areas. In developing countries, both government and markets can be weak, and strengthening that capacity is essential. Unfortunately, the citizen sector is often even weaker in these countries, in part because they have less money and time to donate, because skills are lacking, because sometimes citizen sector is actively undermined by government and business sector, short investment or other outreach lobbying. NGOs are also vulnerable to weaknesses termed voluntary failure. One potential pitfall is the lack of adequate incentives to ensure effectiveness, which require careful organizational design. Another is ever-present danger of capture by the goals of funders rather than intended beneficiaries, such as fundraising, because ends in themselves often means or given too little attention, as when poor fundraising keeps NGOs from realizing the scale they need to have a real impact. NGOs may not receive the immediate feedback from the market that private firms receive or that elected governments receive at the polls. This lack of rapid feedback can encourage these weaknesses or at least let them go on for some time embracing being corrected. In the next part, we are going to talk about how trends in government and reform are being done by the government. Now, governments are trying to decrease inequality among the people, and there are some ways there is more effective than others. Corruption is the use of public resources towards one's interest for power or wealth. This mostly occurs in poor countries, where rules of law is not well enforced. The elimination of corruption is important for development for several reasons. First is government can promote growth, sustainability, and high income. Second is elimination of corruption itself is the objective of development. Third is the effect of corruption for disproportionately on the poor and prevent them from escaping poverty. According to the graph, lower-income households and firms tend to use bigger fraction of income to bribery than in higher-income households and firms. Next is decentralization. It means that feasible decisions are made mostly by local level. This makes problems easier to identify and fix, easier than using central authority. Trends toward decentralization have been growing in development world as well as democracy has spread in Latin America and elsewhere, and the political process has allowed to providing greater autonomy, notably more fiscal autonomy for fiscal and local level of government. The graph represents how rules of law affect GDP per capita. As rule of law index gets higher, the GDP per capita also gets higher. Now, thank you for your attention and we hope you enjoy our presentation. Thank you.